Progress is ultimately what everyone is after when they first step into the gym. And as a beginner, it's often quite easy to see that progress is indeed occurring. But for intermediates and especially advanced lifters, the difference between a plateau and meaningful progress can be a fine line. So if you've been training for, say, 8 years, multiple weeks or even months could be required to hit that next PR. So in the meantime, while those PRs are kind of brewing under the hood, it's helpful to have a system for determining if the ship is headed in the right direction. And in my view, a good system for this is the difference between seeing some meaningful gains or accidentally plateauing for a year or even longer. So in this video, I'm going to go into my personal favorite system for tracking progress. And by tracking progress accurately, I can decide to troubleshoot the program, or I can decide to leave things be and let the lifter ride out the progress that they're experiencing. To analyze training progress, we need to take a step back and ensure we're tracking variables that are actually meaningful for the outcome of interest. Luckily for powerlifting or even just general strength training, the ultimate goal is improvements in performance. So we can track this outcome of interest by looking at performance of your everyday training sessions. So you can take performance from the top set, often in the 1 to 6 repetition range, and you can take the number of reps performed, the weight used, and the RPE that the lifter rated that set, and you can calculate what's called an estimated 1 rep max, and you can monitor how this estimated 1 rep max changes over time. With that said, I don't love looking at these estimated 1 rep max trends on a very short-term basis. They're, in my view, much more helpful when you zoom out. So for example, I'll pop up on the screen here a plot of the estimated weekly total, so the sum of estimated squat, estimated bench press, and estimated deadlift 1 rep max from each week over the course of 83 weeks from one of my clients. Now, on a week-to-week or block-to-block basis, we don't have a full 83 weeks to ensure things are moving in the right direction. So we need to have some shorter-term tools. Now, I'll start by saying that we can absolutely use lifter intuition, especially as a lifter becomes more and more advanced. I really value their subjective input. So I highly value conversations and getting their insight into just generally how training is feeling. If a lifter feels that a change to the program or a technique change has led to them feeling like they subjectively have more pop out of the hole in a squat, or they feel more stable for their heaviest set of the week, that's a really great sign to me. But beyond that, from more of a numbers perspective, my favorite way to monitor progress is through what's called block-to-block comparisons. So as a basic example, let's say a lifter is doing a heavy squat triple for their weekly top set in their program. Now, for me personally, I like to have some sort of RPE progression week to week with these triples. So if it's a 4-week training block, it may be RPE 6 in week 1, RPE 7 in week 2, RPE 8 in week 3, and maybe RPE 9 to 10 in week 4. Now, we could look at the estimated 1 rep max on a week-to-week basis, but I think a lot of coaches would agree that there's a lot of noise in those very short-term week-to-week comparisons. And instead, block-to-block comparisons allow us to look at the same week of 2 blocks and look at the performance difference. So you could look at week 2 triple at RP 7 using our example, and let's say that was 405 pounds in block A. And then in block B, again, you have the week 2 triple at RP 7. Let's say in block B, the lifter used 415 pounds. That's a very good sign. Now, you might be curious, like, why does Josh think this is such a good sign? And in my view, there are 3 reasons that these block-to-block comparisons have very high precision and higher precision than other approaches. The first is fitness and fatigue dynamics. The second is arousal. And the third is RPE accuracy. Now let's go ahead and break those down one by one. So the first is fitness and fatigue, and this will change throughout a block. Throughout the block, you'll gain both fitness or underlying strength, and you'll accumulate fatigue. Now in a perfect world, each block will lead to more fitness than fatigue, and thus you will get stronger throughout that block. But even then, it can be hard to tell what is causing that strength increase. So for example, your underlying fitness could be going up a lot, but if fatigue is also going up a lot, your gains could be quote unquote masked until you do a taper and test. And this is decently common for some advanced lifters. So in this example, good stuff is going on under the hood, but it's hard to pick up on with very short-term comparisons. On the other hand, by comparing block to block, you're able to compare performances with similar fitness and fatigue dynamics. And then secondly is arousal. Honestly, this is largely a product of how I personally like to write programs. So I coach people to be more chill early in a block and then more aggressive near the end of a block. So this alone can influence performance. But if you're comparing block to block, you're at least able to compare performances with similar arousal levels. And our last point is RPE accuracy. So by comparing block to block, RPE accuracy is better accounted for. Now we know from the research that one of the main variables that makes someone less accurate in their RPE ratings is being further from failure. And you can see a nice visual of this from a meta-analysis on RPE accuracy research from Halperin and colleagues. On the x-axis here, you have proximity to failure that the prediction was made. On the y-axis, you have the actual accuracy of that prediction. So what this means is that it's going to be harder to rate an RPE 6 accurately compared to an RPE 9, for example. Thus, if you're comparing an RPE 6 set in block A to an RPE 6 set in block B, hopefully they're at least similarly inaccurate. But either way, we can just put more stock into those higher RPE ratings near the end of the block. And in fact, the most common training performances I'm looking at as a coach are those in the last week of a block. And I like to call these attack weeks. Not only are these the heaviest and highest RPE weeks, but as I mentioned, I encourage the lifter to bring extra arousal and get hyped up for these top sets in the attack weeks. And we can do that with confidence because we know that the following week will be some sort of lower stress week, like a deload week or an introductory week, to allow the lifter to catch up recovery-wise. So these attack week top sets really check all the boxes and thus are really important for monitoring progress. They have similar fitness and fatigue dynamics, they all have high intent, and they all have very reliable RPE accuracy. Now, to nail this point home, let's consider an example 12-week training cycle made up of 3 4-week blocks. And at the end of each one of those blocks, there's an attack week. So there's 3 total attack weeks in the 12-week training cycle. And perhaps we're doing top sets of 5 in the first block, top sets of 3 in the second block, and then top singles in that last block. Within the cycle, you can definitely look at these block-to-block top sets in the attack weeks and confirm that performance is trending up at a solid rate. But in my view, where the magic really happens is when you have a lot of training data and can look back at previous cycles with the same top set rep number. So if you run another cycle, again with top sets of 5, 3, and then 1, you can look back at the last cycle attack weeks and see if they're now higher. So for example, you can look at the top triple at RP 9 to 10 in the attack week of cycle A, which would be week 8. And then you can look at that same set, so a triple at RPE 9 to 10 in week 8 of cycle B. And you can of course look at non-attack weeks from cycle to cycle as well, but those attack week top set performances at the same rep number cycle to cycle are really, really helpful in my experience. Now, a savvy listener will know that a lot goes into analyzing progress for a lifter beyond just the X's and O's that I discussed here. So you'll also want to look at things like body weight changes, as well as the goals of the block in the first place. So for example, if the goal of a block is biased towards hypertrophy, we'll want to have insight into the actual hypertrophy progress from that block. And just in general, assessing hypertrophy over the long term is important for strength athletes, and of course just anyone looking to get as jacked as possible. Now, that topic of analyzing hypertrophy progress probably deserves its own video, so comment below if you'd like to see that. But I'll mention here that we like to use training performance as a big piece of the puzzle for analyzing hypertrophy progress as well. And we have what I'll call a proprietary approach to this here at Data Driven Strength, which you can see here from one of our lifters using our lower cost Infinity Programs system. So you can see included here some analysis of sets beyond just those top set estimated 1RMs. All right, I hope this video was helpful and adds some tools to your tool belt for making sure your training is headed in the right direction. So to quickly recap, I recommend comparing block to block performances at similar rep ranges in RPEs, especially in the hardest, highest RPE weeks of training. Now, if you like this video, you may want to check out our Infinity Programs system, which is linked below. And our system integrates a lot of these ideas for you. The system utilizes the approach I mentioned of quote unquote naming weeks, such as attack weeks. It has various periodization options and even provides data analysis tools to visualize your progress so that you can inform the system of how your training is going, and that ultimately allows the system to make improvements for your future programs. With that, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.